Empower You is the brainchild of Dan Reginald, CEO of Frame USA. His vision is to present useful information on diverse topics and timely issues that fulfill our mission to educate, enjoy, and engage. We are now in our 13th semester. It is easy to register for any class. Simply access our website at empoweruohio.org, scroll down to the class, and click on the register link. Or if you'd like to provide your email when you sign in, we will send you a reminder for each class, and you can register off of that email. Most of our classes are presented virtually online. Go to the website 10 minutes before start time and click on the Join in Class link. You can also watch many of our classes at a later date. This is our second semester to offer business classes. They are branded Empower You Business and are meant to help improve business skills. They are held on Wednesday evenings at 6 o'clock, and they do cost $10. At the end of our program, there will be time for questions from those in attendance, as well as our virtual attendees. We just ask, please, that you wait for us to bring a microphone to you when you have a question so that those online can hear. Empower You is a free university powered by donations. The costs incurred include website, constant contact, printing and advertising, virtual, some speaker and personnel expenses. To allow us to continue offering these classes, we always pass a bucket at the end of the class. Any small donation that you're willing to give, we do appreciate it. And we appreciate you understanding the costs we have to cover. Please feel free to provide any comments or feedback on any session you have attended. We also value your input and ideas on topics or speakers that you may have. You can reach us at info@empoweruohio.org. Thank you for attending tonight's session, and at this time I'd like to introduce our Executive Director, Nita Thomas.
Thank you, Betty. I appreciate it. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I think this is going to be a really fun class. And in case you didn't see it, there's a popcorn machine back there. So when we get to the beer, if you want to go get some popcorn, that's okay. I wanted to talk about some upcoming classes that we have. Tomorrow night, we're going to have a class here called Crucial Conversations, which is about how to talk to people when you're talking about a subject that you know is divisive and you can remain civil. I've seen this class before. It's really good. Several people asked for it back again because it's one of those things you can go to a couple times and reinforce it. So that's tomorrow night. And then Thursday at Sims Library, we're going to have connecting trails and how all the trails in the tri-state somehow connect up together. So if we have any hikers here, bicyclers, we'll tell how the bicycle paths hook up. I think that would be a really good one for the spring if you want to do something fun with your kids. And then March 28th, we're going to Skype Grace Marie Turner. Has anybody here heard of her? Garth, I know you don't know her, really? Well, she's one of the leading experts on healthcare, and she follows the whole healthcare. I don't know if I should call it issue or debacle. I don't know what to call it. But she will give us where it is today, where she thinks it's going to go, the good and the bad and the ugly about the healthcare plan. And this is all she does. She's really one of the leading authorities. And the last one I want to talk about is March 30th, we're going to have Honor Flight. I'm really excited about that one. They'll talk about what they do on an honor flight to honor our veterans. And I think that one's going to be really good. And I do want to mention on April the 3rd, we're going to have Representative Bill Seitz at the farm. But Bill sent me an email the other day and said, Nita, did you know April the 3rd is opening day? It's like, no. He said, I don't think we should have a class that day. So we are moving that to the following Monday. So it is right on the web, but it's wrong on our calendar. So that's all. I just wanted to talk about a few classes. And while I have the microphone, I want to thank our volunteers, Bill Roll and Bill Moore, and Andy, our producer. And I would like to introduce Amy Sander, who is our operations manager and who is busy trying to take pictures right now.
Hi, how is everybody tonight? Good. Y'all excited? Good. I hope so, because I love beer. If you don't love beer, I don't know how to love you. So we should all get along really well tonight. So I'm going to start by introducing our speaker this evening, and then I will have Lindsay come up and draw the tickets for the door prizes that she so graciously brought with her. Um, Lindsey Roeper is the dream facilitator for Rivertown. She turns dreams into a reality in a way that leads to a dynamic environment that values people, purpose, excellence, and tenacity. People often describe her as a passionate person who enjoys solving people puzzles and building culture, as well as her brewery's brand. She's been involved in all facets of the brewing industry and currently is involved in every element from production to restaurants to sales and to marketing. During her 11-year tenure in the beer biz, she's learned the power of storytelling, teamwork, and tenacity as it pertains to the building of a healthy and successful business and culture, both microbiological and human. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindsey Roeper.
I'm so excited to be here tonight. Actually, I met Amy, was it opening night or the second night?
Yeah, second night.
The second night at the restaurant, and I happened to be, I don't stand so close to you, and I happened to be just trying to help out the team, and then we started talking, and she told me about this, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, because usually I'm stuck at the brewery behind the scenes a lot, but this is what I really love to do. So selfishly, I'm probably more excited than anybody else here.
Okay, so we're going to do the door prizes real quick. The first one we have is a set of glasses, a beer opener, and some coasters. Take it for that.
Okay, it is the last three. It's 796-667. 796-667. Yes.
There you go.
Outstanding. Congratulations. I don't
Okay. The next prize we have is a bottle of the Rivertown barbecue sauce.
And this one is, oh, wow. Okay, 796-668.
Okay, and then we have Rivertown growler. Yes, it's empty. Sorry.
Sadly. This is 796-656. Okay. He's gonna, yeah. 659.
Okay, and then the last one we have is a Rivertown hat.
This one is 665.
And I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to set a timer on my watch so we can stay in a prompt fashion. Sometimes I get into stories and I lose all track of time. So to get us started off here, so as Amy mentioned, my name is Lindsay. My husband Jason founded Rivertown back in 2009. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about, yes, that's a great shirt. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our history and how we built our business. We're also going to get into the brewing process, and I have some items for you guys to taste and smell as well. We're also going to talk about the ingredients that go into beer, and then how to taste beer. Afterwards, during the question and answer section, we can go back and I can get you guys some samples of beers. I brought 4 different ones that cover a variety of the flavors that we'll be talking about tonight. So, without further ado, yay. Okay, so our mission statement is, From our processes to our people, we embrace a culture, a tenacious culture of purpose and excellence, which results in a consistent, remarkable liquid crafted with hard work, passion, and care. This came out of our, truly the entire history of Rivertown. To go all the way back, Jason, when he was growing up, his Uncle Andy was always homebrewing, and Jason was fascinated by it. Rumor has it that he had his very first homebrew beer when he was 8 years old at his uncle's wedding, but I can't confirm or deny that because I was definitely not around yet. So, but from a very, very young age, he was hooked, and he would always bother his uncle, I want to brew, teach me how to brew. And his uncle said, when you turn 21, I'll teach you how to brew beer. And lo and behold, on Jason's 21st birthday, he was over at his uncle's house brewing his first batch of beer. Unfortunately for all of us, he started brewing his second batch before he tried his first, because from what he tells me, his first batch of beer was absolutely the worst tasting beer ever produced in the world. His uncle left out some very important steps so Jason would learn. So, I mean, this bottle, the beer that he brewed had like hop stuff in it and malt in it still, and it was a Heineken clone, and needless to say, did not taste good. But anyways, from that very first day, Jason was hooked. So he kept on homebrewing, kept on honing in his craft. He would take the beer to his different neighbors, and they would all come back and say, oh my gosh, this is the best beer I've ever had. So this is in 1999, 2000, just to give you a time period. So craft beer wasn't really a huge thing back then. And, you know, it got to a point where Jason started to realize, he's like, is this really the best beer that they've ever had? Or is it the best beer because it's free beer? And as we all know, free beer always is the best tasting beer. So he decided to take it the next step. And he joined the local homebrew club. He was a Rotarian, as was his uncle. And he started entering his beers into different homebrew competitions, both locally, regionally, and nationally. When you enter a beer in a homebrew competition, you get a sheet back that gives you feedback. And that's what he was searching for. He wanted to know if his beers were stylistically correct, if they had off flavors, and just anything that he could do to improve with his craft. Now, he was surprised at first because he started, not only did he get those sheets back, he started getting tons of awards. First place awards, second place awards, all kinds of awards. So he continued, he just kept on brewing. In around 2002, he discovered sour beers. And you want to know what, I didn't ask a very important question. I mean, I made an assumption that if you are coming to a beer class that you like beer, but are there any homebrewers in the club or in the room? Anybody dabbles a little bit? Does everybody drink beer or know somebody that drinks beer? Okay, outstanding. Just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page. So in 2002, Jason discovered sour beers. His ex-wife, who I'm the dream facilitator, so her title is Nightmare Facilitator, depending on the day. But oh gosh, I realize people can see this online. I know one day that's going to bite me in the butt saying that. I know one day it will, but hopefully not tonight. So anyways, he came across Lindemann's Framboise, and him and his ex especially, she really liked that. She wasn't really into beer, but she really loved that Framboise. And if you've had it before, it's very sweet. Lindemann's makes some really incredible beers. They're fruited beers they add a lot of sugar into. So, I mean, it's truly, you don't so much get the sour, but it's like sweet cherry juice, sweet raspberry juice. So he set out to make a clone of that for her. And when he started researching, he was researching the more traditional way of how to make sour beers. So he did all the research. He was making a Framboise. Well, a traditionally crafted Framboise is much different than the Lindemann's Framboise because it utilizes wild yeasts and bacteria, and it doesn't utilize very, very sweet sugar syrup. So he put all of this time and effort into that, and out comes this wonderfully tart, complex, just a hint of fruitiness, beer. He just fell in love. And that's how he discovered getting into sour beers, which we'll talk more about. And I actually have an example of one back there as well for you guys to try. So anyways, fast forward, time's going on. He's still home brewing. Jason came from the car industry. So he was a salesman for a number of years. He worked in finance for a number of years. And he worked for Ford Motor Credit. So time goes by, 2007 hits, the economy takes a dive. He's working for Ford Motor Credit, and he gets the option of either taking a severance package or being relocated to North Carolina without any type of relocation package. So Jason had a tough decision to make because he was married, he had 2 little kids at home, and relocating really wasn't an option. So he decided to take the severance package. And that's when, right around that time, he was getting ready to send about $300 worth of beer out to a homebrew competition on the East Coast, or on the West Coast. So Jason's a responsible guy, which is why I love him so much. He decided, he's like, just took a severance package, looking for a new job. Probably not a great idea to spend $300 to send beer out to a homebrew competition. So he held on to that beer. Now, a few months later, he was reading and he heard about the Sam Adams long shot competition. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with Sam Adams, right? Boston Lager. They have the largest brewery in Cincinnati, which is awesome, and they make a lot of their innovative and seasonal products here. So Jason reads about this long shot competition, and what that is a yearly competition that Sam Adams puts on that's open to all homebrewers. So you send in your homebrew, they pick 3, and those 3 beers they replicate and put into a special release 6-pack that celebrates the homebrewer. So pretty cool. So Jason's like, wow, free to enter, drop-off point in Cincinnati. I have beer that I'm not doing anything with. Let's do it. So he takes the beer down to the Cincinnati brewery, doesn't hear anything for a few months, kind of forgets about it. And then he gets a phone call. And this woman says that she's Jim Cook's secretary. And Jason was like, this has to be one of my friends messing with me. This can't be. And he looks at the phone, and sure enough, it's a Massachusetts area code. So she tells him that, hey, you're a finalist in the long shot competition. Congratulations. We're going to send you out to Denver, Colorado to the Great American Beer Festival. And we're really excited to have you. And he won with a sour beer, an elderberry lambic that he brewed in 2003. So this is 2007. So this is 5 years later with that aged sour beer. So flies out, and still, like, during this whole time, he's still home brewing. The idea of opening a brewery is pretty cool because that's the dream of many home brewers. And, he just is kind of in that place where it's like, I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know if we can make it happen. After he went out to the Great American Beer Festival, he had the opportunity to talk with Jim Cook, who continues to be a very supportive part of Jason's life. And Jim is truly an amazing individual and never forgets anybody's name. I mean, it's scary almost. But he heard Jim Cook's story, and he heard Sam Calgione from Dogfish Head's story, and he heard Dan Carey from New Glarus. Oh, I forgot that's there. Dan Carey from New Glarus' story, and Greg Cook from Stone. And what he heard was that they all started off the same way that he did. They started off in their basements, in their garages, in their bathtubs. They had a dream, and they made it happen. So Jason left that trip extremely inspired, and that's when he put pen to paper and wrote the first business plan for Rivertown. So now we're going into 2008 here. Keep in mind, it wasn't legal for breweries to have tap rooms in 2008. So Jason, and the original version 2 of the business plan was actually Rivertown was going to be a brewery and a restaurant. So there were only 2 licenses available. Either you could be a production brewery, you brew your beer, and you sell it to wholesalers or retailers directly, or you could be a brewery and a restaurant, a brew pub. So Jason wanted to be a brew pub. So he gets denied over 60 times by 60 different lenders, saying not only no, but heck no, there's no way we're giving you financing because you're telling me you want to open a restaurant in a downed economy, you have no restaurant experience, and you know how to brew beer? Well, that didn't sound like a good idea to any lender. So Jason contacted Jim Cook, and Jim made a connection for him with the Small Business Association. So he went and met with somebody, and that person advised him, was like, hey, you want to know what? Do what you know how to do. You know how to brew beer. Take away this whole restaurant part and just focus on a production facility. So Jason wrote the business plan to focus just on production, and he was very quickly funded. Rivertown in Lockland opened up with 2,000 square feet and about $250,000 altogether. That was for equipment, that was for pretty much everything that you needed to get started to brew beer back in 2009. It's a little bit different now, I can tell you. With that, Jason opened up Rivertown with the thought that he would brew about 500 barrels of beer. So beer measurements is done in barrels. So everybody knows what a keg is, right? You know, like a half barrel keg. So 1 barrel of beer is equal to 2 kegs, just to give you that reference. 1 barrel of beer is also equal to about 14 cases of beer. So Jason was thinking that first year, do about 500 cases, cool, that's great, and just slow growth, and he was going to deliver every drop himself and all of that. Well, he gets into it and very quickly realizes that it is near impossible to brew beer, deliver beer, take orders, all of that. So he partnered with a wholesaler, and that first year sold closer to 1,500 barrels of beer. At that time, the masses in Cincinnati were very thirsty for some different alternatives. In 2009, there was us, Mount Carmel, Rock Bottom, and Hofbrau. Moorline wasn't brewed here yet, and that was about it. So this was something new, this was something exciting. We opened up with beers that were near and dear to Cincinnati's heart with German heritage. So we had a Helles Lager and a Dunkel, and we had a wheat. We also were doing our lambic, our sour beers too, from the very beginning. And yeah, everything was gung-ho. As time moved on, we distributed in different states, and we continue to distribute in 7 different states right now with that growing. And 2012 comes along, and the landscape changes. Finally, Ohio decides that it is completely reasonable for a brewery to have a tap room so people can come in and drink their beer. Well, Jason chose Lockland because we really cared about location. Has anybody been to our Lockland facility before? Okay, so you know that going there, it's like, am I going in the right place? Am I safe? There's lots of questions that come up, especially back then when you were going to Lockland. But Jason chose Lockland because it had inexpensive rent. It had great water profile. The Lockland Brewery pulls from well water that was set up for GE, and also access to the highway, right? So 2012, now it's legal to have tap rooms in our brewery, and we're in the middle of Lockland. How are we going to get people to come here? So we opened up a very, very modest tap room, very, very simple, and it was pretty cool. And we had a space to be able to give people tours, and we had a space for people to taste our beers, the freshest that they possibly could be. And that was a very exciting change for our business. Kind of moving on here. And Jason and I started dating when Rivertown was about a year old, so in 2010. We met at a beer festival, of course. So why wouldn't that happen? So moving on, we continue to grow. Jason has a really big vision for what Rivertown is. You know, now all of a sudden, there's a lot of entries into the local category. I mean, just in that, so from when we opened and there were about 4 breweries opened, there's over 30 now. And that's a really, really quick growth in an industry in a local area within the span of 7 years. I mean, it's insane. So we started looking at, you know, what do we want to do to update who we are. What kind of beers do we want to brew? What is this all about? Right around that time too, Jason bought out his business partner as well, which was a exciting time. They just had kind of two different visions. Business partnerships are very much like marriages. You really have to pick the right person and communicate. And his business partner had one vision, and Jason really loves taking a well thought out, aggressive risks. You know, he just sees the big vision and he knows where the dreams are, and that's what he chases after. So they decided to part ways. It was very amicable, and actually his business partner opened up pretty recently Wooden Cask down in Newport, which is making some fantastic, just straight up malty, wonderful beers, like beer tasting beers. So I highly recommend, because it's hard to find things that don't have like tons of hops in them. And he has the Scottish ale on nitro that is just like, it's to die for. But anyways, I digress. So when Jason bought out his business partner, that's what really triggered a rebranding for Rivertown, and also a reclamation of what Jason's dream and vision for Rivertown always was. So when we talk about kind of these core ideals that we have are of purpose, excellence, and tenacity, that all comes from Jason in the story. I mean, especially the tenacious part. We have very much an environment where some people say it's stubborn, but tenacious is such a much more exciting word for it. But we have a hard time just, if somebody tells us no, that's impossible, we're not like, oh, okay, cool, let's just, guess the answer is no, let's move on. We're always driving and pushing and asking those questions, and that's something that's so important, not only in business, but also in life. And then the purpose too is just, we work very hard to be calculated. We're not a brewery that's like, hey, we have this idea, let's just like throw it against the wall, see what works, and then go for the next step. Everything that we do is very calculated and often daunting, but very exciting at the same time. And then the excellence piece too is something that's very important, because we believe that if you can't do something right, then you probably shouldn't be doing it at all. And while these standards are often very daunting and very hard to stand up to, because we have held up to those standards for so long, we've been able to invest and build our dream brewery from the ground up, which brings us to kind of where we're at right now. So Jason bought out his business partner in 2014. This is kind of, I find this to be a funny story, but so with Jason, if he starts talking about something, or if he starts YouTubing something, it's pretty sure that it's going to happen within the next couple weeks. Jason moves very, very fast. With the YouTube piece of it, he was watching one day at home, he was watching about curing meats, right? Making sausages, cured meats hanging from wherever, all of that. I went out of town for one weekend and I come home to like 6 pieces of meat hanging in our basement, curing, making pepperonis, salamis, all that kind of stuff. So Jason works quickly, both at home and professionally. So buys out his business partner, we go through this rebranding, we know who we are. Jason starts talking about, you know, how long can we stay in Laughlin for? How realistic is this space for us? Where do we want to be? Where do we want to grow? So we were on vacation, and we were in San Diego visiting Stone Brewery, and it is a truly, truly beautiful brewery, built from the ground up, huge bistro and gardens. And we were walking, and we were like, wow. This is what a brewery looks like when you get to build it from the ground up with the right intentions. So we started talking about where we can be Laughlin-wise. So we knew in Laughlin we would have a max capacity of about 15,000 barrels, 15 to 20,000 barrels. So at that time we were like, okay, so we could probably hang tight in there for a year, a couple years. We didn't own the space in Laughlin, we lease it. So we were looking at that. You know, we were looking at, we would love to have a restaurant. Can we have a restaurant in Laughlin? Because where we're at is not zoned for that. And, you know, we were like, you want to know what? Probably in about 5 years, 4 to 5 years, we'll be in a place where it would make sense to build a brewery from the ground up. So we're talking like 2018, 2019. Well, I kid you not, less than a year after that conversation, we're planning Monroe. Just everything kind of fell in place. We started looking for a space that could really fit our vision and fit where we were going as a company, being a regional brewery in 7 states and continuing to grow that aspect of it, where we could have a restaurant. And we looked at many different cities, but the city of Monroe was very excited to consider us for their town. And actually, Stone Brewery, I've mentioned them like 3 times now. I never realized that. But Stone Brewery, when they were looking for their East Coast location, they actually looked at Monroe, Ohio. So the officials of Monroe, too, were also very much like, hey, we lost out on a brewery once. Like, let's not do this again. So they've been wonderful to work with. And for us, we see the northern suburbs getting further north. We get the southern suburbs of Dayton moving further south. And right smack dab in the middle is Monroe, Ohio. And that's right where we are. And there's only a couple other restaurants in town as well. So we're just like, the casinos up there, so much potential. So we broke ground in June of 2016, and we opened up the restaurant part of our facility a couple months ago. We opened up a 208-seat restaurant. The patio, when it opens, can fit about 150 guests. And then there's also a 2-acre beer garden off of that. And we are looking to brew our first batch of beer up there this week, which is very exciting. And location is very near and dear to our heart. And that will continue on as a heritage space that we're going to use as a tap room and also as a private event space. We actually do a surprising amount of private events down there for different companies, businesses, and it's a great space for that. Monroe, of course, will house all of our production and our restaurant, and we'll continue to go from there. And it's funny because I can't imagine as we get all these tanks in, you know, seeing it first when you see the ground, it's like, okay, cool, this is, you know, a nice chunk of 6 acres that we're on. This is awesome. And then you see the building frame go up, and I remember thinking, I'm like, gosh, I don't know, this doesn't seem that big. Then the walls went up, and I was still like, is there going to be enough room here? And then stuff started getting put in. I'm like, holy cow, this is a really big space. It can fit a lot of stuff. And now, as we're just on the verge of getting our bottling line up there and everything, we're like, we could probably use some more room already. Man, how are we going to do this? And I can tell you, it's definitely large when you have to walk from the offices all the way to the lab. I was like, man, we're definitely getting our steps in our exercise program. I like to tell the team, I'm like, well, yeah, this is part of our complimentary health benefit package that we offer to everybody. There's walking, like we have the #1 water, drinking water in the in the world, actually, coming from Hamilton, but yeah. But that's kind of where we started and where we are now. In these last 2 months, we've grown from having 28 team members to over 90 team members with the addition of the restaurant. And it's been exciting and amazing, and it definitely takes big dreams, and also it's the most important part of dreaming big is taking actions on those dreams. And that's kind of what has built our company from the inside out. And something that we aim to do too as we continue to grow is that if we can encourage others and encourage that belief that anything is possible when you dream big, and then you pair that with hard work, that is when we know that we're doing a solid job. That message just so happens to manifest itself in beer and delicious barbecue food. So yes. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about beer, right? So this has 4 basic ingredients. I truly believe that there are, hang on a second, I'm just going to set my timer here. I believe there are 5 ingredients in making beer. So we have water, very important, malt, hops, yeast, and then the 5th ingredient is I always say it's the passion of the brewmaster and the passion of the team members, because I can tell you, passion is how people get into beer. It's definitely not from a paycheck, no matter what scope you're on, unless you get one of those sweet billion-dollar deals from one of the big companies. Otherwise, beer is definitely a labor of love. So water is 95% of beer. I like to think of it as very hydrating. So that's something to think about. And in both the choice of the Laughlin location as well as the Monroe location, water played a huge factor in that. So Laughlin, as I mentioned, we pulled from the well water that was created for GE. And well water is great to brew with because there's not much that you have to do with it in terms of treating. Modern technologies can allow a brewery to do whatever they want with the water and to create any type of profile. Way back in the day, beers like Bass Pale Ale could only be brewed at Burton-on-Trent in England because of the water profile. That water profile was not replicable anywhere else. This day and age, you can create whatever water profile that you want. In Monroe, we have the pleasure of pulling from the Hamilton Aquifer, which for the last 5 years has been rated the #1 drinking tap water in the entire world. If you did not know that there was a competition, there is. And if you visit us up in the restaurant, not to make a big deal, but we give you this water for free. You get to drink the #1 drinking tap water in the world for free. Even sparkling, still free. So come up and enjoy some #1 drinking tap water with us. And the water profiles actually between Laughlin and, thank you so much, between Laughlin and Monroe are very similar. So we're excited to have a very, very clean water profile that we get to work with. What was that? Yeah. I didn't think you guys needed to see water physically, but this is what water looks like. And the only type of filtration that we go through is just with a charcoal filter. There's many different ways to filter water for brewing and just in general in life. For us, there's not really too much that we want to take out of it. So we just use a simple charcoal filtration. And as I mentioned too, water does also impact the flavor of beer. Next ingredient, I like to call this the body and soul of beer. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this around. I brought 2 different types of malts with me. The one that is not crushed is 2-row barley. This is our base malt that we use in all of our beers. The second, which is crushed, is Abbey malt, which is a specialty malt that we use in primarily in Solus and some of our other beers. You can definitely eat these. They are fresh. Kind of tastes like grape nuts, but feel free. Look and feel. The difference between the 2-row and the Abbey as well and the crush in it we'll get into when we talk about the brewing process. So as I said, malt is the body and soul of the beer. It's important for a few different things in the brewing process. So it adds color. Malt can range in color from very, very light, even lighter than that 2-row, to truly as dark as your black shirt, roasted, toasted, black patent malt. The more that the malt is roasted and toasted, the more of that roasty, toasty coffee profile comes out. When the grain goes through the malting process, so what that means is that it gets cut down from the farmer, it goes to a malt house. The malt is put into, or the barley is put into a very warm, damp environment to encourage sprouting. So as soon as that little sprout pops out, because the goal is to have as much available sugar in that little kernel as possible. So letting the little kernel start to germinate is when it has the most available sugar. So as soon as it starts to sprout, they put it in the kiln to stop that process. And then once it's in the kiln, just kind of depends what type of malt that they're looking to create in terms of how long it gets cooked for lack of a better term, or roasted for. The other 2 items that the barley is responsible for too is, in addition to color, is flavor. Again, depending on how dark roasted it is, depending on the recipe of the beer. if you've had a really dark beer, like Guinness is a great example. I brought our Roebling Porter. You're going to pick up on those just like those dark coffee, toasty flavors. Or if you had something very, very light that uses like a crystal malt or a caramel malt, you'll get some more of those sweeter, bready, biscuity flavors that come through in them. Malt is also responsible for mouthfeel. So mouthfeel is how the beer feels in your mouth. You've had, I'm sure, different experiences with, say you've drank a light lager. So it's very light, very effervescent, doesn't really hang on your tongue, it's just kind of clean, right? Or you might have had a beer that is the opposite of that, that sticks almost in your mouth, that's just really rich, chewy, delicious, roasty, yummy. So depending on how the sugars are and what type of sugars are extracted out of the malt in the brewing process, that's what's going to help contribute to mouthfeel. The next ingredient is spice of beer. So who in here enjoys cooking? Great. Who here knows how to use salt and pepper? Cool. That's what hops are in beer. So I really feel like you guys are all super awesome, nice people, so please do not eat these. I only let people that I don't like eat hops and drink yeast. I won't do that to you guys. These are Delta hops, which is a proprietary hop that Hopsteiner, a hop grower, has created, and it's a mix between a German and American hop. But feel free, if you want to take one, crush one in your hand, you can do all of that. You'll notice that these are hop pellets, and they do not look like that. We use hop pellets because they are, A, they don't take up as much space, but B, it is this beautiful flour crushed into a very, very concentrated form. And what is wonderful, and we'll talk about this in the brewing process too, is that hop cones get caught up in all kinds of parts of the brewing process. Hop pellets very nicely kind of end up in a pile in one of the kettles that we go through. So, but hop spice. So just as you would use salt, pepper, turmeric, cayenne pepper, any of those things in a recipe, that's how you use hops. Depending on what the recipe for the beer is, you add the hops at different points. So if you add a hop earlier in the process, in the boiling process, you are going to get more of those bitter flavors out of there, like tea. If you leave a tea bag in for a really long time, it starts to extract those bitter flavors. If you add hops later on in the process, then you just get more of those aroma and that wonderful, piney, citrusy, all those wonderful flavors. Hops are also responsible for flavor and bitterness. So when I talk about flavor, hops can contribute beautiful, beautiful piney, resiny, fruity flavors, all kinds of flavors. Hops are to beer what grapes are to wine. There's tons and tons of different varieties and hybrids and all kinds of neat stuff to play with. When I talk about bitterness, that's just straight up bitter, dry on your mouth. Bitterness in beers is based on a scale called the International Bitterness Unit Scale. So IBUs is what people commonly refer to it. And it's a calculation of how much alpha acids are in a hop during the brewing process, right? So I'm sure many of you have heard it's like, oh yeah, this beer is like the hoppiest beer in the world and it has 200 IBUs and it's just so super crazy and intense and yay. Well, our palate can only perceive really up to 80 IBUs. After that, everything is just like super bitter. So it's a marketing technique, but after 80 IBUs, everything just kind of is like, oh wow, that's just super bitter. Most beers, depending, like lagers, lighter beers, less hoppy beers, fall into anywhere from like the 8 to 25 IBU range. A sessionable IPA or pale ale falls in right between the 45 to 65, and then when you start getting into more intense IPAs or double IPAs, those are usually higher than that. Do we have any IPA fans in here? Any hop fans? Nice. What about any malt fans? Any malted beer fans? Cool. And to demonstrate this profile, I brought Little Sippa, which is our session IPA for you guys to try. So this fourth ingredient is my personal favorite. It's yeast. Yeast is a beautiful microbiological organism that is around us right now, making everybody's life very happy. When it's concentrated and interacts with a very, very sweet liquid like wort, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it makes beer. So yeast is responsible not only for the alcohol, which is important, not only is it responsible for carbonation, it's also responsible for a lot of flavors. So a beer that I brought to demonstrate this is Jenica, which is our Belgian blonde. The flavors that yeast produces, people refer to them as fruity or estery, which estery to me is like banana-esque. It's just kind of a word that helps to describe banana-y, bubblegummy, like those types of flavors. But yeast is responsible for all that. If you've had a beer like, I'm trying to think of a common one that's out there. Many Belgian beers are very, very yeast forward in their flavors. Blue Moon is actually a really great example of a yeast forward beer. All those kind of fruity profiles that are in there all come from the yeast and the Valencia orange and coriander that they add in there too. But there are, in a very simple way, there's two different types of yeast that are primarily used in beer. There's ale yeasts and lager yeasts. Lager yeasts, or bottom fermenting yeasts, ferment at a cooler temperature and impart very crisp, clean flavors. So everybody knows what a Budweiser, I'm sure, or Miller Lite tastes like, right? It's crisp, it's clean, it's effervescent, and that's exactly what a great example of what lager yeasts do. Ale and lager yeasts ferment at a very cold temperature. Ale yeasts are top fermenting yeast, and that really just means like where the yeast likes to end up in the tank. Lager yeast likes to hang out more towards the bottom. Ale yeast likes to hang out more towards the top. Ale yeast, fermented at a warmer temperature, is what imparts all of those very interesting fruity characteristics that they have. So, and underneath both of those, there's tons and tons of different types of yeast that can be used. We use at our brewery, not counting the wild ones, we use regularly about 3 to 4 different yeast strains. Now, when you start talking a little bit more about sour beers and stuff, that is a totally different kind of process. We do souring in both stainless steel tanks, like traditional stainless steel tanks, and also in barrels. So for our barrel-aged sours, we do a wild open fermentation process. So if you come to the brewery, you will see a very large, huge wooden barrel. So what we do is that we make wort, which we'll talk about in a second, and we take that sugary water and we pump it into this very, very large wooden barrel. We take the top off and we let the yeast and bacteria that's floating around in the air drop all up into the wort and start the souring and fermentation process. It's very wild, it's untamed, it's uncontrolled. There's tons of different strains going on in there, and we let that cool in that large container. And then after a couple days, we rack it off into wine barrels, gin barrels, tequila barrels, bourbon barrels. We have a few different types back there. And then we let the beer just hang out for about a year. We taste it periodically. We've had some of our barrels since the very beginning, so they're 7 years old. So they're pretty predictable in their cultures and in the way that they behave. We have some young barrels that are just kind of doing whatever they want. And then once those beers are in there for that allotted time, and we feel that they're ready, the art of the barrel-aged sour beers come in the blending. So we taste each barrel, and if there's a really crazy, tart, acidic barrel, and then there's a really mellow, nice, wonderful barrel, we'll blend those together to get that perfect kind of flavor profile that we're looking for year after year. So yeah, very interesting process. With our stainless sour beers that we use or that we create. Divergent is one that I brought to show you guys that profile. Are you guys familiar with Activia yogurt? Or Greek yogurt is another great example. So there's an outstanding bacteria in there called lactobacillus. So that's how we sour that beer. So we take the wort, we pitch lactobacillus into it. We let the lactobacillus do its thing, make everything nice and sour. We use a blend of 2 different types. And then once it's done souring, we continue it on its fermentation process. So I like to say, especially with our barrel-aged sours, again, health benefits. Because there's tons of vitamin B in there, there's lactobacillus, there's like all kinds of good stuff for your digestion. I mean, there's alcohol in there as well, but I can tell you, if you drink enough sours, that will get things moving more so than any cup of Activia will. So let's talk a little bit about the brewing process. So first is milling. So when we were passing around that grain and the 2-row was uncrushed, and then the Abbey was crushed, you guys might have noticed, and I'm going to pass it around again just to give you guys something fun to do and look. If you look at the crushed grain and you notice the little white pieces in there, that's the starch. So the milling process is how that comes. So the grain goes in whole, like it was in the 2-row cup, into our silo that we have. From the silo, it gets augered in through this pipe into our mill, and our mill goes ahead and crushes the grain, making it into that crushed version and exposing all of those starches and sugars that we want for later on in the brewing process. If you were to just put a whole kernel or not mill any of the grain before it went into the brewing process, you wouldn't be able to extract as much sugar from the grain, which ultimately you need the sugar to feed the yeast. Next is the brewing process. So within here, we are working at Rivertown. You can have a variety of different vessels. At Lockland, we were working off of a 3-vessel system, and in Monroe, we're working off of a 4-vessel system. So the first thing that happens is that we take that crushed grain, and that grain is determined on what the recipe is. It's just like following a cooking recipe. So we put X amount of 2-row, X amount of chocolate malt, X amount of Abbey malt, just depending on what we're brewing. So that all comes in and it goes into a vessel called a mash mixer, which I actually left off here for some reason. So a mash mixer at our brewery. And what that mash mixer does is that it shoots in the crushed grain and it shoots in water all at the same time. And there's a huge, it looks like an airplane propeller on the bottom that mixes it all around. So essentially you're mixing super hot water with grain. Think of it as making oatmeal. And you're trying to extract all of those sugars out of the grain. So after the grain and the water is getting mixed around for a while, we move it over into what we call our lauter tun. Now our lauter tun also has huge rakes in it, and I'm pretty sure, I am positive that, and very surprised that there hasn't been any horror movies that have been made in breweries, because some of the equipment, I'll tell you, like, it's terrifying looking. Like the blades that are in the lauter tun, I'm like, I'm pretty sure if somebody went down there, they would not be coming back out. So what the lauter tun does is that allows us to control the temperature of the water that is being mixed with the grain. So for different levels of extraction, we use different levels of temperature. It sits for different levels depending on what we're looking to get out of it. So in the lauter tun, everything just kind of continues to mix around. It also starts a process called the Vorloff process, which basically takes the wort that's being created and circulates it through over and over again, just to work on getting all of those sugars extracted. And then we start a process that essentially rinses all the grains off from the top down. And we pull off That's to make sure every single bit of sugar that we can get gets out of that grain. When you taste grain that's been used and spent, it doesn't taste good. Like it just tastes like not sweet, not anything, nothing, because all the sugar is gone out of it. With our spent grain, we work with a local farmer. He has a big truck that comes up, and we put all of our grain in there, and then he feeds it to his animals. So very cool. We try to do good things with it. So after that process, it goes into the boil kettle. And here's where things, in my opinion, start to get a little bit more exciting. So the boil kettle is where all that wort, so wort is just the word for sugar, for the sugar water that we just extracted out of the grain. Depending on what recipe we're doing, the wort boils for X amount of time. This is also where we sprinkle in the hops, which is not at all like that. I remember the very first time that I brewed with Jason, because I worked for Goose Island at the time, so I was a huge beer nerd, and I was like, oh my gosh, local brewery, I want to go brew beer, and this will be awesome. And I remember the first time that I did, because my experience, I'm thinking, I see the Sam Adams commercials, I'm like, oh, I'm going to sprinkle hops in, it's going to be wonderful, and it's not anything like that. It's wet and it's dirty, it's sticky, and it's very janitorial. So in the boil kettle, it's not so much a sprinkling of hops as to taking a huge bucket that's been measured and dumping them in. And then depending on the recipe, the hops will go in at different times. So some recipes will have a 60-minute addition and a 90-minute addition, 120-minute addition. You use different hops throughout the process to get a certain flavor or profile that you're looking for. And at this point in time, you can also add things like, if you're using dried orange peel, you can, different spices, you can also add those in during the boil kettle process too. So after the boil kettle, we take that and we put it into a vessel called a whirlpool. So another big, wonderful tank. If you've had the experience before of running around a small circular pool and creating a whirlpool, very similar process. So the wort shoots in at a very rapid pace, and it spins around very quickly. So any hops matter that's left over in there, any type of malt matter that's left over in there, all gets piled up into a really nice cone in the middle, which makes it much easier for the next process, which is going into the heat exchanger. So the heat exchanger is where we rapidly cool down the wort, because we need to start getting it ready to get into fermentation and add yeast. And just like humans, yeast does not like to be put into boiling hot environments. So the heat exchanger, basically one side has the hot wort passing through it, the other side has cold water at a very specific temperature passing in it to cool that wort. And we recapture all of the water and continue to reuse it. So after it goes through the heat exchanger, it goes through a device called, nope, it is down here, okay. I left it out. Right down here is the device that we use for filtering, which is a centrifuge. It's super cool. It sounds like a jet engine, literally, when it turns on. What the centrifuge does is that it goes really fast. We can calibrate it and tell it to make the beer be either crystal super clear down to however many microns, or you can say, no, we want more of a cloudy beer with this particular recipe. And this little device does it all for us. To talk about some of the specs too, so in our Lockland brewery, started off with a 7-barrel brew house. We grew to a 30-barrel brew house. Well, we went 7, 15 barrels, 30 barrels. This system that we have in Monroe is a 50-barrel brew house, which is awesome. In Lockland, we used a press filter. So it's about this large with about 40 different pieces of very thick paper in it. And you essentially, it pushes the beer through there to get a certain level of filtration. It would take us to do 50 barrels, almost 5 to 6 hours. That's if it's behaving. It takes a lot of water to use. This little centrifuge here can do about 75 barrels in less than 2 hours. Our water usage overall for a brewing process or in a day goes from, in Lockland, we were looking at over, I mean, gosh, probably close to 6,000 to 8,000 gallons of water a day. The Monroe system uses 1,500. So it's amazing just with the different water reclamation, with the different type of filtering that we're using, and it allows us to be more accurate. Our Monroe system, finally, we have a system that can keep up with our dreams and our goals. And out of this system will be brewed the most consistent, high quality beer that we've ever been able to produce. So after it goes through the centrifuge, we go into fermentation. So in Lockland, we started off with very small fermenters, of course, but we are leaving Lockland. We had 40 30-barrel fermenters, 2 60-barrel fermenters, and 2 100-barrel fermenters. So what that means in Lockland, for example, so we had a 30-barrel brew house, so we would have to brew once on there to fill up a 30-barrel fermenter. We would have to brew twice on there to fill up a 60-barrel fermenter. In Monroe, we have 10 100-barrel fermenters and 2 200-barrel fermenters. And with our system, basically, so we just need to brew twice to fill up a 100-barrel. We need to brew 4 times to brew up to do a 200-barrel. And in Lockland, we were capped because of water and being able to heat up water. We could only brew 3 times a day. In Monroe, we can brew up to 7. So it's awesome. The guys are really excited. There's some wonderful automation that has come from this system. And when I talk about automation, we no longer have to turn 40 different connections and carry hoses and tubes all over the place. It's all hard piped in. And there's this amazing little computer that can tell you everything that's going on. But nobody be mistaken, there's still definitely stairs that go into the mash tun and all kinds of stuff. So if the guys need to climb in there, it's still very hands-on. And yes, the hops still do get sprinkled in by hand. There's also, it's a 2-level brew deck, so there's a nice set of steps as well. We're all, again, all part of the Rivertown Health program that we have. So in fermentation, our beers on average stay in there for 7 to 14 days, depending on the beer. That's where the yeast gets pitched, and that's where it starts to do its job on all that sugar. So the yeast go ahead, start eating that, adding flavors, adding carbonation, adding alcohol, of course. And depending on the beer is how long that it stays in there. Totally, oh no, you wanna know what? I didn't do that out of order. I apologize. Can I blame it on being pregnant? Let's blame it on being pregnant. So filtration happens after fermentation, not before it. So anyway, so filtration, as I was saying, centrifuge, we kind of already talked about all that bits and pieces. So once the beer's done fermenting, we go ahead, we put it through the centrifuge. Any remaining yeast things that are floating around in there get taken out, and then it gets sent over to packaging. So these 3 vessels up top are called bright tanks. In Monroe, we have 3 100-barrel bright tanks, so we can essentially take a 100-barrel of beer in the fermenter and put it into a 100-barrel bright tank. And this is where carbonation gets added, and we are able to add however much carbonation we need based on the type of beer that we're brewing. So it's very precise. And then it goes to be bottled or kegged. We have a 72-head bottling line. It can do up to 700 bottles a minute, which is insane. We do not run it that fast. Or, on average, we do about 200 bottles a minute on average. Our facility in Monroe also added some very nice pieces to the puzzle. So we now have a little machine that makes all the boxes and the 6-packs, and also a depalletizer, all kinds of fun stuff. So this is the fun part as we enter into the Q&A section here. So, tasting beer. It's pretty simple. Is anybody into like serious beer tasting? Or are we just all beer drinkers here? Serious kind of combination. So at the end of the day, The most important thing is if you like the beer or not. If you really want to be beer geeky about it, you can go ahead and really be beer geeky about it, and that's what I'll tell you about here. However, at the end of the day, sometimes it's nice to just drink something or eat something and not be like, oh, I can taste how these grains came from like the north side of the mountain over in the Himalayas, and it's wonderful. Like sometimes you just want to drink beer and eat food, and it's all good. So when you're tasting beer in the more beer geeky way, there's 3 basic things that you need to do. The first one is to take a look at the beer. So pour it into a glass. Very, very important. Bottled beer does not taste good towards the bottom because when you take something that's carbonated and you essentially are shaking it back and forth, depending on who you are, typically 6 times, not usually 2 times, the carbonation gets released, it gets warm, it gets nasty. That's why that last part in the bottle usually always tastes not good. Plus, when you pour a bottle of beer into a glass, and we're talking straight down the middle of the glass, none of this like, oh, let me put it really gently down the side so I don't have any foam on it or anything. No, you want that foam, and let me tell you why. You want that foam because that foam is releasing not only wonderful aromas, it's releasing carbonation. And carbonation, you have 2 choices for where it can go. It can either go in your stomach, or it can go in the glass, and you have this wonderful aromatic experience. If it goes in your stomach, you feel full, you feel gassy, and let's all be real, gas only comes out of our bodies 2 ways, neither of which are pleasant for the people around you. So pour it into a glass, great aromatics. You don't get all that carbonation in your stomach, so you can eat more. You can probably drink a little bit more responsibly, of course, and you have a great experience. So you just poured your beer right down the middle of the glass, has a beautiful head on it. You can smell it, it's wonderful. And you take a look at it. And when you're determining color of beer, you want to think of paint chips and Crayola crayons. You can say that a beer is blonde, or you could say it's yellow, but it's like, let's get a little bit more into it. So I'm always a fan. I'm super psyched when I come across beers that are colored in burnt sienna. Like everybody's pretty familiar with that crayon color. It's that really beautiful, like kind of tawny brown. I'm like, oh yes, this beer looks like burnt sienna. And the people around me are usually like, yeah, cool, Lindsay, that's great. Why don't you drink some? So you want to determine color. You also want to determine clarity. Beer's either going to be crystal clear. You could read a newspaper through it. It's going to be hazy. So you can still kind of see some of the words on the newspaper on the other side. It's going to be cloudy, which you can't see the newspaper on the other side, or it's going to be opaque, just pitch black. You can't see through it, nothing. The next thing that you want to do is smell the beer. So in smelling the beer, that's why it's so important to have it in that glass to release those aromas. Some people take long sniffs, some people take short sniffs, totally up to you however you want to do it. And just be creative in what you're smelling. You know, if you're smelling flowers, what kind of flowers are you smelling? If you're smelling, you know, crackers, what kind of crackers are you smelling? Just become more descriptive with it. If you're smelling fruit, what kind of fruit are you smelling? And of course, there's a step in between smelling and tasting that I like to reserve for only the most advanced, and you guys are advanced, but there's a technique called retronasal. So you kind of like taste and smell it at the same time. It's real weird. People think that I'm messing with them, but I'm not. But essentially, you plug your nose, you take a sip of beer, or wine, pop, whatever you want to do. Take a sip of beer. As soon as you swallow it, unplug your nose and breathe gently just out your nose. Beer will not come out your nose, nothing, don't worry. But what happens is that you'll get these nuances in the beer that you didn't taste before. And especially with yeasty beers, you get some really neat flavors in there. The last step is tasting. So when you taste beer, what do you taste? Do you taste things like fruit? And if so, what type of fruit? You know, beer will be one of 5 things. It will either be slightly bitter, slightly sweet, very sweet, or sour. So pick one of those out and start from there. And then like, oh yes, I taste fruit. Well, what kind of fruit? I taste jackfruit picked from the rainforests over on the other side of the world. You know, you can really get as far into it as you want to. And ultimately, the last thing that you want to decide is, how does the beer feel in your mouth? Is it clean? Is it crisp? Does it taste like velvet, like that velvety feel in your mouth? Like, think about different textures that you encounter. And that's how you can talk about mouthfeel. And then ultimately, do you like the beer or not? That's the most important part, right? Would you drink another one, or are you like, no, this isn't for me? And that's something that I strongly encourage too, is that if you've had an experience with a beer or a particular style of beer, if you're just like, I do not like IPAs, I don't like them, blah, 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 I will never drink one again in my life, I encourage you to be fearless and tenacious in your adventures of beer tasting, because while you might have not liked one IPA, there's 50 million other ones out there, and you might find one that you like. I often say to people, and I have a pretty high conversion rate over the last 11 years of wine drinkers, people that say that they don't like beer, all that kind of good stuff. It's not so much that you might not like beer. It's more of like, you haven't found the right beer to try yet. And there's so many different flavors out there. And the same with sour beers. I mean, it's like that. There's some caveman stuff that we're working against too, with both IPAs and sour beers that we have to work against. That just keep in mind, caveman brain is like bitter, that's poisonous. Just depends how strong your caveman brain is, or cavewoman brain. Sour to caveman brain means spoiled, you're gonna get sick, don't drink it. So with any beer that you try, no matter the style, take at least 3 good sips. And if you still don't like it, you can either keep on drinking it, because eventually everything tastes good after you drink enough of it, or don't get discouraged and try another beer in that style. But there's so many great breweries here nationally. I mean, the world, it is an oyster when it comes to beer. Just keep on cracking them open and trying them. Of course, come visit us, rivertownbrewery.com. Like I mentioned, we just opened our new facility up in Monroe, so we're going to be starting tours up there April 13th, which we're very excited about. We also have our Laughlin facility. If you're looking for a chill place to just grab a beer, play some free arcade games, you can do that down there as well. And I look forward to getting some taste for you guys back there. We have Jenica, which is a great example of an easy drinking yeast forward beer. I have Divergent, which is a great example of a mild sour beer, soured with lactobacillus. So great health benefits for this hour of the night. I have our Roebling Porter, which is our signature beer that our business is really has been built around since we started brewing it. It's our #1 selling beer. That is a nice imperial porter brewed with espresso from La Terza, which is an artisan coffee roastery right across the parking lot from Laughlin. And there's also vanilla in there as well. And then I also have our Lil Sippa, which is our IPA and a great example, or Roebling's a great example of a malt beer. And then Lil Sippa is a great example of a hoppy beer. But I thank you guys for your time. And I do encourage you guys, just be tenacious, be adventurous, try all kinds of different things in both food, beverage, life, dream big, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you guys again for joining us tonight and coming back.
Thank you. Did anybody have any questions for our speaker before we adjourn? Do you mind?
Oh, no, I love questions.
Where do you get your hops and grains? Do you get them
Yes.
locally or?
So we have done, with our grains, we work with a company called Brewers Supply Group. So our 2-row malt is sourced from Canada. We use so much of it, so it's hard to work. There's really nobody locally that's doing craft malts yet. But most of our grain comes from Canada, America, and then also Europe, primarily. When it comes to hops, our hops we primarily use American hops, sourced from the Pacific Northwest area. With some of our beers, we do use some German hops as well. And we have done, we did a project for the last 2 years with Miami Valley Hops, which is a local hop grower, specifically with their Chinook hop that they grow. And it's delicious. But yeah, there's some really cool hop farms that are popping up around too that you can do tours of. And it's something to see for sure.
I've brewed about 3 batches of beer using a kit, and I want to transition into using grains.
Cool.
And I don't know anything about it, but I'm reading about protein rest, alpha rest, beta rest. You
Yeah.
talk about that in the process. Is that?
Yeah, so that's where it comes into when we were talking about the mash mixer and the lauter tun specifically. That's where those processes happen. So what he is referring to, there are different rests that you have to keep the malt at, meaning it needs to stay at a constant temperature to extract different types of sugars. So one level will extract long chain sugars, which contribute to body and mouthfeel. The other process will, or another rest will contribute to like actual extraction of short chain sugars, which contributes to what the yeast can feed on, because yeast love the short chain sugars. But yeah, there is, let's touch these afterwards, because I have some great resources for that. It's a fun jump to make, for sure.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes.
I did hear about a hop shortage coming up because of the extreme expansion of brewing.
Yes.
Are you locked in the future, or are you seeing it yourself in the business for your future?
Yes, there was a big hop shortage a couple years ago that it was challenging to get through that. But we do have contracts secured for the base. We use Bravo hops in pretty much everything, so we have contracts secured for that and for all of the hops that we use on a regular basis. But it is always challenging with so many new breweries coming in, and it's harder for the new breweries to get those contracts. But fortunately, we work with a few great suppliers, so if we can't get one from one, we can usually get one for the other. And we just placed our contract orders for 2018 as well. So yeah, you can't just call and be like, hey, I want some hops. The farmers have to plant them, grow them, harvest them, and then you're contracted, like you contract with them to get X amount of hops at different times throughout the year. There is always that possibility. There's also something that's great about the craft beer community is the sharing aspect of it and trading hops, but there's also a website called the Lupulin Exchange where different brewers, kind of like a black market of hops, like breweries will post hops that they have overages of or hops that they want, and then everybody kind of works together nationwide to get them. Yes, that's definitely a real ingredients to brew beer is nobody's making millions on them. I think we're up to like maybe 2 cents a bottle that we make in profit after everything's taken off of it. But what is important to remember is that as long as everybody is able to understand why craft beers are priced at the way they are and understand that many of those businesses are small businesses, family-owned businesses that are trying to grow, it makes that investment even more satisfying. We are able to keep our pricing the same for 2017, which we were very excited about, and we're anticipating doing that for 2018. But again, with the hops, if that price goes up significantly, that's something that we have to look at because.
Any surprises with the Monroe facility?
Yeah, like that we encountered or in general for everyone?
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming, and I think we have some to try back there.
Yes, I'll continue talking.
I don't
I'll go
need
back
to
and forth
drink,
with you.
do I? And let's thank our speaker. She was wonderful.
Oh, thank you very much.